We are live.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Good afternoon, colleagues. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to the July 19th meeting for the Budget and Compensation Subcommittee. Dr. Fleming and I are glad to have you join us this afternoon as we continue our conversation and our work toward looking at reframing the budget and compensation schedule for our educators K-12 in the state of North Carolina. We will put up on the screen before you this afternoon's agenda, which includes approving today's agenda as well as the meetings from our June 7th meeting, and then looking at our salary and professional advancement accounts and salary scale proposal. So that is the flow of the conversation this afternoon. Are there any items that we need to add to the agenda not presented here? Hearing none, then I will accept a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting.
Jackie Ennis, so moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second, Monica Lambert.
Thank you. It's been moved and properly seconded that we approve today's agenda as presented before you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Thank you. The motion carries. Dr. Evans also sent you, prior to today's meeting, the minutes from our June 7th, 2022 meeting. At this time, we need to approve those minutes. I will accept a motion to approve.
This is Chad Alderman, so moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Amy Holcomb, I'll second.
Thank you. It's been moved and properly seconded that we accept the minutes from June 7, 2022. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. Motion carries. Thank you so very much for your attention to the agenda and the minutes. So we'll move forward. I want to remind the group of our estimated timeline for the work of the Budget and Compensation Committee, and we'll get that timeline up on the screen before you. And of course, we have a meeting here in July. We're going to try to squeeze in, if possible, one additional subcommittee meeting in early August. Dr. Evans, would you like to speak to that at all?
Yes, so there has been multiple requests from different subcommittee co-chairs. And so as a result, Chair Miller has decided to extend these decisions and discussions with the subcommittee work into August. I'm sorry if there's an echo.
No,
I hear an echo for sure. So then that means that there will be a joint co-chair meeting towards the end of August, as well as the one on August 10th.
Thank you, Dr.
Wrap up this work.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. So in addition to today's conversation, we'll try to get one more opportunity to convene and make certain that we're addressing our elements of the subcommittee charge before a discussion with PEPSC. Dr. Fleming, anything you might like to add, sir?
Don't have anything at this time, but I believe regarding that, but I do believe when we get into work, we'll probably have some conversations on some of the stakeholder groups that we've met with over the past month.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Fleming. So that's where we are estimated timeline-wise. So we're not deviating from the timeline we shared with you all several months ago. We're going to hold true to that timeline as best we can. Just want to remind you what our intent is, not only this afternoon, but also in that meeting that we'll try to add in August. We are attempting to really firm up the current draft model on which we've been working over the last year or so. And we want to make certain that we continue to respond to the feedback that we're receiving relative to the work that we're doing, but also making certain that information that we need to share with other subcommittees is getting funneled and communicated to those groups so that we can stay focused on our 4 focal areas, which I'll remind you of here in just a few moments. Keep in mind that a quorum isn't needed to finalize any change by the subcommittees. And what we're discussing will go to the PEPSC Commission. So what we're doing is not finalized in any way, shape, or form. It has to go to PEPSC. And then depending on the outcome there, that makes the determination as to whether or not it goes to the State Board of Education. So the 4 focal areas on the net screen is what we've been focused on over the last year or more. Is just a reminder that, we're charged with determining minimum salary scenarios for each license level, determining the amount of the professional advancement accounts, which we'll talk more about this afternoon, determining hold harmless provisions, and then determining cost proposal for phase-in strategy with OSBM. So those are our 4 focal areas as a budget and compensation subcommittee, and we have been dogmatic in sticking to those 4 focal areas, with any other responsibilities going to the appropriate subcommittees external to ours. So we will continue to do so this afternoon. So that's where we are, and this is the work that we're doing. Dr. Fleming, anything you might like to add, sir, or anything from our DPI colleagues that we may need to address at this point?
I don't have anything. Thank you.
Okay. So at this point, then, we will transition to the first part of our agenda, where we will engage in conversation around salaries and professional advancement accounts. Hopefully, at the end of this conversation, we can come to some level of consensus so that we can figure out what our recommendation will be as a subcommittee. So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that we will engage in a conversation around salaries, and Dr. Tom Tomberlin will join us and facilitate this part of the conversation. So Dr. Tomberlin, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. Good afternoon, everyone. There we go. And share my screen here. So at the request of the subcommittee members, we have recalibrated the teacher compensation scenario tool. And I'll just walk with you really quickly what looks like I'm updating. Yeah, what changes have been made. So in here we see, as we saw before, the estimated number of teachers in each license area, and the 4 minus that was the original conversation that has been taken out at the request of the subcommittee. So you'll have the estimated allocation of current teachers into salary 1, 2, 3, and 4, and as well as those advanced roles. And again, we don't have estimates on the licensure apprentice role, but that is reflected in our new estimates of the salary floor. So the conversation that we had in the subcommittee prior was that with this legislative increase in the teacher salaries, that our model should reflect that, so that salary increase is not being kind of subsumed within our recommendation. And so here are the new default numbers for those licenses. Basically, we added on the equivalent of that 3.5%, or it's actually more than 3.5%. The percentage change from 21-22 salary schedule to the 2023 salary schedule, we applied that percentage increase to those estimates. So you see now that the apprentice is $34,000 a year, the license 1, and there's some rounding here, folks, just to let you know that we needed to round these a little bit to make some reasonable numbers. And then license 2 goes up to 42, license 3, 47, license 4, 58, and then that advanced classroom excellence is 63 with the job differential, and advanced leadership is 75 with the job differential. And here again, you see how that changes the current average from what it used to be. A small uptick for the license 2 level. The license 1 is pretty much on par where we are, but substantial increases for license 3 and license 4, as well as those advanced roles. Here's where we see this would change the overall state average in terms of the state funding that's included in this model. And then down here is the really important piece, the projected increases. So where you see it in dark blue, those teachers would make more. That light blue is that this salary bump or this salary plan would not increase, or it may be less than what a teacher is currently making. And so that's basically where your hold harmless provisions have to come in play, those light blue areas. And then you can see here, this is reflecting the total additional compensation allocation from the state government that would be needed to make this model work, kind of a breakdown of where those costs are coming from. And then these toggles that allow you to kind of turn off different things, the PD stipend and such. We also adjusted the PD stipend to reflect the $2,500 as discussed in previous meetings of the subcommittee. And then here's the proposed number of apprentices that is used to generate this number here. So that can be toggled up and down and would have impact on this number and the overall salary. And that's pretty much it. You'll notice that the amount we're requesting doesn't really change, because all it did was account for the money that the General Assembly has appropriated for the 2023 raises. So it doesn't create much of a difference in the overall budget of the compensation plan. And I'm happy to take any questions.
And Tom, so you know we can still see your screen. So if you want to stop sharing.
Oh, okay. I guess it's more important about what I'm sharing, huh?
Right. Colleagues, any questions for Dr. Tomlin?
I do want to say big thanks to Andy Baxter for redoing this. He is definitely the brains behind this. And Andy, if you wouldn't mind dropping a link to this new tool in case staff subcommittee members want to fiddle around with it on their own.
Jackie Ennis, Dr. Ennis, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you, Tom. That was very interesting. And my question is a little bit different, and maybe we're going to address it later. But I just know in the original models we put out, we were saying that at level 4, every 5 years, if they meet what they're supposed to, they get a $5,000 increase. And then in the latest thing I'm getting is showing like each year 0.5% increase. And I'm just wondering which one this model is reflecting, or maybe that's not part of this model.
So, right. That's a great question, Dr. Ennis. And that neither of those suggestions are in this current model. So those things have come up subsequent to the creation of this, and we never really had a decision from the subcommittee about what we were going to do, and then this other suggestion came up. Whatever this subcommittee decides in terms of how you manage that, so basically you have two things in front of you: a $5,000 salary increase at the time of renewal, and then this other proposal that's being put in front of you on these incremental steps. Once you reach a license 4, there's a kind of, it's a hybrid step and lane and an effectiveness model, basically, where you are stepping up incrementally once you hit license 4. Once the subcommittee decides their preference on that, we will definitely do the work to incorporate that into the compensation dashboard.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions, colleagues? Dr. Fleming, I want to make certain I give some time if there are any thoughts you'd like to add at this point.
None at this point.
Thank you, sir. Let me check the chat area. All right. The only thing in the chat, and thank you, Andy, is the link that Dr. Tomlin referred to moments ago. So that's available to you. I don't believe we need to take any action at this point. I think it would make sense to move to the next part of the conversation, which I think would then influence and inform this part of the discussion a little bit more. So I think we'll move forward to part 2 of the discussion. And DPI staff, if I'm missing anything, please let me know before we go to this next part of the conversation. What we want to do at this point is talk a little bit more about the teacher salary schedule proposal. To Dr. Ennis's point moments ago, you did receive last week, I think it was when Dr. Evans sent out the meeting material, a proposed salary schedule that looks different from what we've discussed to date. And we want to make certain that we spend time this afternoon engaging in conversation around this proposal. So I'm not certain, Dr. Evans, and you all can let me know who's going to lead the conversation on the teacher salary proposal.
So as part of the request from this subcommittee, we have gotten some feedback from financial officers, but before that, I don't know if Jeff Coltrane is on the call.
I don't think he is.
Okay. So part of that feedback was to talk to them about the teacher salary schedule proposal. And Mr. Coltrane, he had put together a proposal that went before financial officers within 8 regions. So these were the 8 financial officers that were able to make the conversation. And they were from different counties within the state to provide their feedback around the proposal that is on slide 11. And what Mr. Coltrane did was looked at years of experience with the license 4 and providing a salary increase each year for that year of experience. So the salary increase would be 0.5% increase each year if the license 4 is successfully maintained. And then the experience-based salary increases for license 4 teachers would be dependent on renewal of the license 4 through the CEU requirement. And the effectiveness requirement. So you can see that laid out right here for years 1 to 25 years. So the first 5 years, you would get a salary increase of 5%. Overall, the finance officers thought that being able to see that on a yearly basis was something that teachers desired. And they thought that that was a good idea to have that increase, incremental increase each year. And then you can see that it jumps to the 10, 15, 20, and 25 years. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything.
And I think Ms. Ennis did ask a question. If it, and I got to find it. I think she was asking if it was 0.5% or 5% each year.
It would be 0.5%.
Yeah.
0.5%.
And keep in mind too, that would not include legislative increases.
Right. So part of the important points that are laid out on this slide talk about that this experience-based salary schedule, it didn't include the cost of living adjustment that's implemented by the General Assembly, and then also current teachers would transition to the new salary schedule based on their current years of experience.
I actually believe it's higher. I'm sorry, I was reading Jackie's comment there. Jackie, I believe it's actually higher than what we had mentioned, and this doesn't include the advanced licenses on top
this
of our
is
level.
Solely license 4. That's right, Dr. Fleming. So this is specifically the feedback summary for the financial officers. There was a thought about making the step increase for the proposal 1.5% instead of 0.5%, since teachers have been used to 2.4% each year. They had concerns about, they wanted master's pay to be reinstated and for teachers to keep it who currently have it. They like the starting pay, the increase in the starting pay for the license 4 teacher, because it exceeds the current maximum for a 31 plus year teacher. They had concerns about the human capital and the cost of the new teacher pay scale, which we've talked about within this subcommittee as well as other subcommittees, and then making sure the tools and resources as financial officers that PSUs have the tools and resources available to implement this type of change in salary scale. Any questions about this feedback?
I'm still curious about this change because I'm looking on this and maybe I'm just not reading. My eyes are not great, but I'm seeing license 4 plus 5 years as being $57,400. And they started off with $56,000. That seems a lot less to me than $56,000 plus $5,000. Where's my logic off?
This is Bill Griffin, Caldwell County. How you doing? I agree with what's being said there. That is quite a bit of difference. And
yeah, we'll need. I think we'll need to adjust it at minimum to our levels, and then do the 0.5 every year. And my apologies, Jackie. I was thinking it was that amount you read was for the advanced licenses, but it does appear, and I apologize. I can't look back at the moment, but it does appear it would be lower. But I was thinking that was with the advanced license.
So this is Tom, if I may.
Yes, please, Tom.
So it is correct that this is 56 based on, this was modeled on the old numbers. So we would probably redesign this to include the 58,000 that would be for license 4. But Dr. Ennis, your statement is absolutely correct. It is a decrease in the overall amount that would be salary that would come with the renewal year. Over that 5-year period, you would see that the the person would earn 57,414, whereas in the $5,000 increase, that person would have been at 61. So it is it is a lower number than what was originally discussed, but it will also also cause the cost of the compensation system. I think the idea here was to kind of hold some of the costs related to the compensation system in check.
Tom, this is Bill. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I agree that this cost analysis, if we look at $5,000 every 5 years, is certainly substantially higher than what this is showing. I wasn't aware of this change. This looks different than any I've seen before in the past. One of the reflections that we looked at earlier had an increase in compensation every 2 years. This goes every year, and then all of a sudden jumps from 5 to 10 to 15 to 25, and the final number there is of course lower than what it would be if you were getting a $5,000 increase every 5 years. I think that the ultimate determinant is that what can be funded and what number would we be looking at that would be acceptable to pay our teachers.
Well, that's right, Bill. And I do know that when Jeff was working on this, he was trying to keep the cost, what is a reasonable ask of the General Assembly. And so I think that's probably where we're at is, it's kind of do you shoot for the moon or do you stay somewhere lower than the moon? And I think that's the struggle we've all had. And I certainly think that's a struggle that Jeff has had on this too. Is, because the first thing I thought after Tom confirmed that it was lower is, we just need to readjust to the numbers we had been talking about. But when you readjust back to our numbers and do this, without the tool, I have no clue what that would come out to be, but we might be back to the moon again or beyond. So I do think we have to keep that in mind. And if we are going to ask for a huge amount of money to fund this, we just have to be prepared that it may or may not happen. It may not happen anyway, but I think that's something we have to think about. And I do appreciate Jeff keeping that in mind when he was working on this, because I do think that's part of the angle he was coming from.
And to that point, colleagues, and this is responding to your comment, Dr. Holland, in the chat area. Dr. Fleming and I serve as chairs, and we want to do the will of this subcommittee. So while we're trying to balance, what might be feasible and reasonable, we also want to think about what makes sense to ask. And if this subcommittee as a totality says, Dr. Fleming, Dr. Graham, we as a committee would like to put on the table X as the recommendation, then so be it. But to your point, Dr. Holland, this is not the subcommittee's recommendation. This is for the subcommittee to debate, deliberate this afternoon, so we can try to figure out what direction this body would like to take moving forward, so we can rework the numbers accordingly.
Yeah, and to go along with Dr. Holland's comment, this is not necessarily, this schedule is one that Jeff worked on himself. The finance officers, I don't think, did any mapping out like this. And they had several questions on implementation, but correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct, Dr. Fleming.
Yeah.
That's correct. One other piece of feedback that the financial officers had was they thought that front loading license 1, 2, and 3 for teachers that are entering the profession would be a good course of action as far as helping to recruit and possibly retain teachers, rather than putting all the money on the advanced teaching roles.
Hey, this is Stephen out of Watauga. Just a few questions. First of all, what's the rationale for the first 5 years having the increase and then jumping to 10, 15, 20, 25?
I don't know that it is the total reason, but I know retention is a huge piece because those are those critical years where the decision is made if an individual will stay in teaching or not.
Dr. Fleming, thank you for that. And yeah, Stephen, I think part of it was to show that there was a wish for the ability to show longevity, and I think that's what was put into to this model is almost a hybrid model. But I also am unclear as to showing advancement those first 5 years and then moving to a 10, 15, 25 year. I'm not sure about that part of what the proposal is.
So, colleagues, what I would ask us to do, if there are thoughts that you have that could improve what we see here, whatever those thoughts may be, would love to hear them. Going back to Dr. Tomlin's earlier point, our subcommittee will have to determine what option we would prefer to pursue. So obviously this process attempts to take that hybrid model of a step and lane and build it with the effectiveness piece. Whereas the other option, which was the $5,000 per every, I think, 5 years, if I remember correctly, is based more on the effectiveness piece. So it really is an attempt here to try to respond to some of the feedback that we have received from classroom teachers, from principals, and so forth, and try to create a model that responds to that input. So that's what Jeff was attempting to do. By no means are we saying this is the perfect solution. It is an attempt to get at a solution, and I'm hoping we can reconcile the difference and land on a model that is more comprehensive and reflects what this subcommittee would desire. So would love to hear your thoughts and ideas this afternoon if this particular option is one that we might want to pursue, or we can go back and take a look at option one and kind of stay in that space. So that's the conversation we'd like to have with you.
And Dr. Graham, one thing too, and again, anyone that disagrees with what I'm saying, because Jeff isn't here to defend himself when I say this, but I do think he was also attempting to somewhat distribute longevity money that's no longer there throughout the salary schedule. And so by adding that 0.5%, again, I won't do the math quick in my head because I'll mess it up, but you are at least you're giving an increase compared to where you are today, but also where teachers were once used to getting a longevity check every year after 10 years, you're kind of distributing that out now. In fact, it's going all the way back to your first year as a license 4, I guess you could say.
So, Dr. Fleming, thank you for that. And Dr. Graham, this is Marcy. Couple of things. In reading all of the feedback, all of the posts, the blogs and things, we know that there are all kinds of questions about master's degree and longevity and things like that. I don't think that either of those need to be part of what we're discussing if we are not presenting to PEPSC restoration of those things for consideration in legislation, because we know that that's what it's going to take. And in reality, going from 5 years to 10 years on this chart, current longevity for classified employees at 10 years is 1.5%. Going from 57.4 to 58.8 is not anywhere near 1.5%. So I'm not comfortable saying that this has anything to do with longevity. For me, that's gone. The second thing is back to Stephen's comment earlier and what he put in the chat. I'm not comfortable going in 5-year increments from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 to 25. We tried that. In 2000, I don't remember what year it was now, 14 maybe, when license years were broken down into 5-year increments, and it has continued to be a point of contention in the current scale. It never worked, in my opinion, in my experience. It did not work well in the beginning when the General Assembly initiated a 5-year banded scale. Districts did lots of different things to get creative to try to recognize the steps within those bands and to honor those teachers' service within those bands. I am not comfortable supporting something that skips 5 years, because you will lose a teacher in year 7 as fast as you will in year 10. So I'm not comfortable with that at all. And Brenda, while I completely respect the fact that 25 years right now is 10,000 higher, 25 years proposed is 10,000 higher than it is right now, and taking out advanced teacher roles, the pipeline problem that we're having and the PR problem that we as a state are having. And there was just an article released in Pennsylvania about the difficulties that they're even having and what other states are doing in the South, who in the past we led in salary those states. It's still not enough. It's just not. And that's not going to be, I don't think, a selling point for teachers if they're a 25-year veteran. For this, it doesn't resonate with me as one of those people. So no disrespect intended for anyone, but I wouldn't feel comfortable standing up in front of somebody saying that to them.
Thank you for that feedback. And you all, let's have honest conversation here. I want to make certain that we lean into and push into a space where we feel collectively comfortable. So we will preface our conversation from this point forward, understanding that there's no disrespect intended toward any individual on the call or anyone not on the call. So let's put that aside. And now let's really lean into hard, truthful conversation so we can try to figure out what path forward makes the most sense. So thank you for that response, that passionate response. I appreciate it. Other feedback, we need to hear from you without question.
Well, and I think, Dr. Graham, and it may be Tom can help us with the tool on this, or Brenda, is looking at if we figure out how to add the true longevity percentages back. Again, I can't remember them. I know Marcy, being in HR, will remember them a lot better than I can. If we were to add the true longevity back, of course, this doesn't count master's degree, but you could certainly add that. And of course, then there's local supplement. But what, which wouldn't figure into this, but what would the true cost to the state be if we added, we got back to doing the percent and a half, all that with longevity? My concern and all the comments have been excellent. My concern is this bill keeps going up, and I'm worried we're going to just put ourselves in a corner that we don't even get anywhere near what we are asking for.
So this is Brenda. Aaron, to your question, the longevity plan that's currently in other areas of North Carolina government is 10 to 15 years is 1.5%, 15 to 20 years is 2.25%, 20 to 25 years is 3.25%, and 25 plus is 4.5%. Just FYI, in case anybody's curious. Yeah. And that, if we were to reinstate that on top of the plan, I would estimate it's like $160 million. And I'm looking here. Anyway, just FYI, that's if the plan were to go back to longevity pay, and that's on top of all those other numbers. I mean, I think haven't had a chance to look at Andy's thing, but I saw in the corner it said 1.3 billion. And, advanced roles are 400 million. These numbers are way bigger than, I'm all for increasing teacher pay, but when you're talking about numbers that would put us beyond any other state in the country, I just don't see that happening. And these numbers are bigger than any other state in the country, not just in our region. So I think I haven't gotten to look at this one here that's proposed here, but if when longevity pay was removed, if I remember correctly, because I was new in this role, but I sat in on all those committee hearings, and anybody can go back and read those because they're still up. But the idea was that since there was a step every single year on the schedule, and there were annual increases for cost of living, and there was longevity pay, I think that was part of why they pulled back on longevity pay. They sort of embedded it into the schedule. But if this goes to a front-loaded schedule where every single teacher at a license 4 level gets to kind of what we're calling the top of the schedule, which is really only the base, as we know. Because again, remember, none of these numbers include local supplements or master's grandfathering or board certification or lead teachers. There's big numbers on top of these. I would say there's a really good argument for something of a retention bonus or a longevity pay I think there's a very good case to be made. So I would just proffer that somewhere in here lies some pretty good answers to some longstanding questions that we've had on compensation.
And I think too, we've talked so much about longevity pay. What if we threw the word longevity pay out and created, not that we have months and months to do this, but that we created our own annual retention bonus after a certain number of years? You can call it whatever you want. Are we hung up on the fact that we've got to follow the state's the state's longevity plan schedule? And I'd be curious to hear, because like I said, I know with Marcy being in HR, is it just people want longevity pay, or would they want something that rivaled longevity pay that was for teachers only or for public school employees only?
So to respond to that, Dr. Fleming, I feel like, and to Brenda's comments, yes, longevity and the dollars that were spent on longevity were built into the salary schedule. And I think that while it wasn't necessarily easy for people to hear and understand and appreciate, it's the reality. And I would just rather us not even use that in what we're trying to do here, unless we're going to really try to restore something to be similar to what we had before. I don't want to try to make it different. I wouldn't recommend trying to make it different. I'm not comfortable with that. So I would just rather not use the terminology. I think it's experience, and it's valuing the experience and the time that individuals will be serving in these roles in a salary schedule that's very transparent. So I would rather, if we're looking at big dollars, I'd rather see us go back in and build in shorter transitions between years of experience credit versus these 5 years, back to similar to what we had every couple of years when you had an increase and you knew it was coming. And having been around since DIRT, I know that there were times that salary schedules were frozen and there was no cost of living increases. So to kind of say that that's a guarantee going forward, unless it's legislated that that's going to be guaranteed every year as well, I don't know why we would even be saying that there's guaranteed that there's going to be a cost of living, unless that's what we're legislating or is going to be legislated. So just two other thoughts, and I'm being very vocal, and I'm going to be quiet now. Thank you for your patience with me today.
Well, and I kind of go along with somewhat amending what Dr. Holland shared, but I think it's valuable, is if we just, lack of a better term, accept the fact that longevity is currently baked into a teacher's salary. Anything we add on additional to a license for, calling it whatever you want or not calling it anything at all, but the fact that it is tied to experience makes sense to me anyway. And not saying again that we have to call it anything, but with all that said, my personal opinion is getting away from the term longevity might be the better approach, but I'd be curious to hear others' opinions on that.
This is Bill Griffin from Caldwell. It's just my thoughts on things. And I'm not sure about the length of time that we would have to meet, but I've brought up before. I feel like if this committee or subcommittee was to have a day together to hash these things out that are so delicate and so deep, that we could probably produce a document or something that would stand moving forward. But we kind of scratch the surface and then move on to something different. Is that out of the realm to get together for a day to come up with a plan or propose what we think is sufficient?
From my perspective, Bill, I don't think that's beyond the realm. I serve at the pleasure of this subcommittee. So if that's an ask or a request of the subcommittee where we would like to try to carve out a dedicated day, I'm certain we can look into it and see what we can come up with. Now, that's Anthony Graham's response without conferring with my co-chair, Dr. Fleming, but that's my initial gut reaction. Dr. Fleming, feel free to completely contradict what I've said.
No, I agree with you. I think for those of probably for all of us for that matter, but my only limitation at this point with my schedule is just the fact that summer is quickly leaving us and the new school year is quickly approaching. And so that has kind of dominated some of my time. But I don't know that we even need a full day, but I do think we need a way that everyone can probably have this conversation with this schedule or another schedule in front of them, or a template or whatever it may be to mark up.
So, Dr. Griffin, I've noted here that's something for us to investigate. I know there's some larger logistical things that we'd have to consider. I don't know, if there's a certain number of us who get together, if it has to be, streamed for public view. I don't know how that works. So we would have to look into all those details and figure that out. But I've noted here for us to investigate that possibility.
Thank you for that notation. I just, we have so much, there's a lot at stake here, and we certainly want to get it right for all those involved. And there's a lot of thought that goes into things, and certainly possibilities of what a budget looks like, and what's our ceiling and what's not our ceiling, and how do we take care of our teachers and reach a consensus that'll be adopted. And those are big decisions, and I would like to get it right for our people.
I agree with you completely, sir. Well, notwithstanding the possibility of trying to schedule some time to engage in this conversation a little bit more, any other reactions, thoughts, feedback to this proposed salary schedule? We've heard a number of comments already. Certainly want to hear others if there are other thoughts or reactions that exist. Dr. Martin, I see your question in the chat area. He's asking if there is a target amount for the overall increase. Of course, pointing to the $1.31 billion projection that we saw moments ago when Dr. Tomlin was working in the tool area. To my knowledge, there's no target, but I will defer to others who may have a better sense of this than I.
I'll just throw my 2 cents out there. I think when you start getting to $2 billion, looking at the grand scheme of the public education budget in North Carolina, that's a lot of money. And again, that's my 2 cents, or 2 billion, whichever you want to call it.
Yeah, I do agree with you, Dr. Fleming. There's a line where we have to walk where we kind of sense what's feasible as a request that may be received, as opposed to something that would be astronomical and although aspirational, would be frowned upon once shared and delivered. So we have to kind of feel that out, but there is no specific target amount, if you will.
This is Wendy Cabral. So if we're going to move forward from here, are we going to work with an idea of an amount in mind? Like at one of the very first meetings, that was my question. As we do this work, what amount are we working with? And response I got was, well, no, we develop a plan that we think will incentivize teaching and bring people to the profession and keep them here. So that's what we've done. And now we're saying, oh, we probably need to rework this. As we rework, are we going to decide even as a group what we're working toward so that we don't do all this work and then say, oh, that's probably a little bit too lofty?
So, yeah, so I wish I could answer that, but I think, again, I would rely on Brenda or Tom or somebody to verify if I'm going to say this correct, but I do think Brenda may have mentioned this earlier. I think, if you can dream it, you can do it. I think we've all heard that all our entire lives. I think the question is, if we start throwing out, we're talking about longevity, and then with the numbers we have here, and if we bumped them up to the numbers we had originally, or not originally, but kind of in our second draft, we might end up having the highest teacher salary in the United States, which is wonderful. I don't know anyone that would say that's a bad thing, but I think I think we somehow have to figure out, and I don't know if that's a gut reaction or whatever. I do think we have to get to a point that, while we'd love to have the highest salaries in the United States, is there somewhere we can go or some number we can agree on that we all stand behind and say that that's an appropriate ask? And I see Alexis on here again, Brenda, Tom. I don't know what the gut number would be, but
we're in the process of doing a teacher pay analysis, but it won't be done till the end of the year. But we've been looking very carefully at surrounding states because, when it comes to teacher pay, really regional competitiveness is most important. And Alabama and Georgia have had substantial pay increases this year for next year. But even with that, we're looking at, if you cost of living adjust and you adjust for the number of, students in our state or the number of teachers in our state, the numbers are coming in at, 600 or 800 million difference for those two states, we're typically coming in third in the region on average pay right now, cost of living adjusted. So to put some numbers out there for. And
Brenda, that's based on our current salary or our proposed?
It's based on, again, these are just really rough numbers. So I recognize that this is a public meeting, so please nobody quote these numbers. But if you look at where we were prior to the last budget increase from last week, compared to where I think Georgia and Alabama are going for next year. So some of that gap got filled by the slightly increased pay last week. But yeah, you're looking at, say 800 million kind of at the most as the gap between us and competing in those two competing states. All other states on average, including Virginia, when you cost of living adjust, are behind us on average teacher pay. Just again, would we be, thrilled if we could say we're the most competitive state in the country? Yeah, but I don't see realistically putting together a proposal that would put us, light years ahead of other states in our region. So that's just one benchmark. I agree with the premise from the very beginning, which is to dream big. And then somewhere you have to find some happy medium in between
Right.
Dream big and and not just past, but just what makes fiscal, sense. We're all, ultimately, I hope every single person here is focused on the most important thing, which is student success. And if you could make a case that every single dollar is going to increase achievement by, X percent, then we're getting somewhere. But we have to really tie all of this to student success, which I've always said you can't have student success without teacher success. So.
So, colleagues, I just realized I was muted. I was wondering why nobody was responding to what I said. Colleagues, I don't know if that necessarily addresses the question of a target amount. And, I wonder if it would be beneficial for us. And I know, even if we're kind of estimating what's happening regionally, we may not have the full analysis performed, but at least having a working idea of what our competitors are in the region so we can try to identify what a target amount would be and then try to work within those parameters or that parameter if that might be beneficial. So to the earlier point, we're not creating a proposal that might be astronomical. And while that would be fantastic if approved, understanding that it may not be feasible as an ask. So it may be worthwhile kind of thinking through what that target amount of an ask might be so we can work within that guideline.
And Dr. Graham, I don't know, I don't know the source of data you would use. I know NEA has done this and others, but I wonder, as a group, do we decide, do we want to compare ourselves regionally? And then we have to then ask ourselves, do we have to adjust for the region? So, or, would we be interested in just the East Coast? And if that's the case, comparing northern states to southern states, there's always adjustments, cost of living adjustments have to be made there. But do we ultimately want to decide on the ceiling? But before we decide on the ceiling, to see what would it be to be number one in the Southeast, number one in the East, number one in the nation, number one for states that are of similar size to us, or whatever it may be. And then from there, determining what we would like our ceiling to be.
Yeah, it's a great point, Dr. Fleming. I think we have to kind of run all those scenarios and figure out what the amounts would be across those different variables and then kind of work from within that framework.
Brenda, you said, I'm sorry, Dr. Green.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Brenda, you mentioned we are number 3 in the region.
With the last data we have. And it depends on if you can include Texas or not. And then if your cost of living adjusted, we're still third-ish, but it flips Virginia out of the top 3 and puts Alabama into the top 3.
And you are thinking it's about $800 million to take over the region, so to speak, for North Carolina to take over the region. Is that what you
That
were
was the last
saying?
number I saw. Yeah,
Okay.
it could be a little bit higher. It could actually be a little bit lower given that we just had an increase, but I think also the numbers that we've been looking at have been based on last year's numbers. So we'll work on the wash.
Dr. Graham, I'd invite anyone to give thoughts on that. You know, I'll be honest, if I'm being open, I think we can do better than 800, but then I get nervous with 2 billion. So I don't know if there's an average or a median that we want, but I just I don't know. I'm really struggling of, well, like I say again, what my gut is telling me we should be. So I'll be quiet. I have talked a lot, more than even normal probably. So, but I would be curious to hear what others' guts are telling them.
Colleagues, any thoughts, reactions, or responses?
And I one more thing, because I did notice in the chat from, I don't know, probably 10 minutes ago or more, Stephen did put in there the number we ran when we first started the meeting, that 1.31 billion. Is that still a reasonable number? Because I think we've been okay around that number. Is that a reasonable number? And then we just adjust the schedule around that number. So if we want to look at every year, every other year, longevity, or not calling it longevity. And Brenda put it doesn't include advanced roles. And advanced roles was how much, Brenda? Was that another 300,000-400,000? Yes. Okay. So yeah, you're at 1.7, 1.8.
So, colleagues, are there any thoughts, reactions to what Dr. Fleming has shared in terms of thinking about, I like this phrase of taking over the region, or any other reactions to this conversation as we've had it this afternoon? So let me circle back. I can't remember who made the suggestion. I'm going to attribute it to Bill, and if it's not Bill, then I apologize to whoever it was. I do agree that it would be worthwhile to have a subgroup of the population, and I'm going to propose a subgroup. You all can push back on that if you like, as opposed to the whole group. But I think it would make sense for a subgroup of the willing, who are willing to get together for a work session, half day, full day, whatever it may be, so we can try to carve out kind of a direction here with respect to what the compensation scale may be, and use that estimated targeted amount so that we can take over the region, using Dr. Fleming's language. Those seem to be the immediate to-do items that I'm hearing as a result of the conversation. But let me pause to see if I am misinterpreting what I've heard, or if there are other thoughts that could advance this work and add value to the conversation. Okay. Dr. Fleming, any thoughts from your vantage point on that proposed approach?
Yeah, I like that. I think it may be good. I do think we'll have to, it may not be today, but I do think we have to come to consensus on what everyone feels comfortable with as far as a dollar amount. Looking at Brenda, I think I said 400,000, but 400 million for advanced roles on that, on the advanced licenses, 1.3 and change with the salary we're talking about here. You know, you're at that 1718, which is a high number. But if that's what, just like you said, Dr. Graham, earlier, but if those are our marching orders to deliver that to PEPSC and beyond, state board, legislature, whatever it may be, we'll certainly do that. It seems to me, this is kind of a no-brainer. It does seem to me that the consensus of the group is to get into an annual salary schedule again, which I know is one of the things, I believe, I'm saying this correctly, but I know was kind of one of the things that we wanted to get away with, or maybe that came from the round table, but I know that was Human Capital Roundtable, that was something I think folks were wanting to get away from, but we have seen feedback from teachers. I mean, that's certainly something they want. So I think we have to keep that in mind. I'm just trying to think of parameters that we all can agree to, and I don't know, maybe it's nothing yet, but so when we do get this work day or this time to work on this template, if
Dr. Fleming, I lost you. I don't know if it's me or if your microphone went out or if you muted yourself.
Yeah, I may have muted myself, but also my phone had a call coming in. Maybe it was that. But I think we need to, if we have this work day we're talking about, our time to fill in this salary template, you know, what are the boundaries we want to stay within? Is it the 1.8? Is it 2 billion? Is it more? Is it less? Are we set on having something that has an annual increase, if you will? Knowing the legislature kind of controls the cost of living increases every year. But as far as the salary is concerned, do we want more every year? Do we want to go, you know, every 2 years, whatever it may be? I just think there's some things that we've got to, I hate to use the word ground rules or house rules or whatever it may be, but are there some things that we need to agree to before we go into a work session? Or are we going to spend the whole work session deciding on the total amount and all that?
Yeah, it's a good point, Dr. Fleming. I think we would need to try to work out those parameters before we go into the work session so that we can then, in the work session, focus on the work. You know, part of the challenge here, and this is just the conversation we've been having throughout the afternoon, is trying to read tea leaves. You know, I remember we had this conversation early on, almost a year ago. I remember Chair Miller at the time encouraging us to think a little bit bigger than where we were. So we have to try to, as best we can, put together the variables that are present and try to infer in those spaces where there are no concrete, definite variables to try to figure out where we're going. But as much as possible, try to be data informed in that approach. So that's why I like the idea of thinking about our regional competitors and thinking about what it would take to take over the region, if you will, and then try to work within those types of parameters and kind of go from there. So we're not spinning our wheels unnecessarily. At least we do have a target that we're working to achieve. But to Bill's earlier point, I want to get this right. And I know that we've got a timeline and all those good things, but our K-12 students deserve for us to get this right. Our K-12 teachers, our communities deserve for us to get this right. And I want to do what it takes to land in that space. And in the final analysis, that's what I care about. And that's what I'll be pushing for. So, any other thoughts, reactions? DPS.
I want to know why Marcy got quiet. I do, and I say that tongue in cheek, but I do want to hear, Bill and Marcy and, everyone. I don't want to name everybody's name. Your thoughts on what are the minimum rules going to be? Are we going to look at something annual? Are we going to look at something biannual? If we're not going to stay every 5 years, if that's too far out. And then again, the dollar amounts and all that. I do think we have to get to that point maybe before we have this work session where we then can plug in numbers.
Yeah, Aaron, this is Bill here, Caldwell. That was some of my point. I feel as though through some of our Zoom meetings and teleconferences we're having here that some of our constituents aren't as vocal as I think they would be in a person in a work session, to where we can hear those points and land on something that works for our state. There's validity, and I think everything that we've said is just finding that model that supports our professionals, rewards our professionals, but yet we get the outcome from our students that we're all looking to desire there as well. So yeah, there's a lot, but I agree with Dr. Graham and what you're saying. If we don't have some type of a model or guide, we can sit there and spin our wheels all day long.
Mm-hmm.
I have heard from our teachers, it seems that they do like that the model where they see some guaranteed adjustments. Just saying cost of living, I think they're scared of that because we've seen budgets that haven't been passed in the former years to where we stayed stagnant for long periods of time. But yet I think we have to be rational in the point that whatever our end game is, and that ceiling, that number that we're shooting for, that we stay within those boundaries to where we're not asking too much. So there's a lot to be accomplished there, but I think we can do it.
So I will say this. I've been listening and thinking and trying not to say a whole lot, Dr. Fleming, but because I've said a lot today, probably more than I should have. But the last 7 years I spent in the largest district in the state dealing primarily with salary and compensation. Even though I was in the HR department, I was the salary person there. And a lot of times my name was mud. Trying to explain to people why salaries were the way that they were and how it all worked out. And to look at a veteran teacher who you're asking to be a mentor, or who would later go on to fill in one of these advanced teaching roles, even though it may not have been called that, they were doing that kind of work. They were guiding these younger people that were coming into the profession, and they were guiding people in some instances who were older than they were, who had 25 years of industry experience that they're bringing to a classroom but they're not trained with the pedagogy that a traditional teacher's trained with, but they're hand-holding these people to get them through and trying to help them survive. And I have to tell them that, well, we're doing what we can to give you a 2.5% supplement difference every 3 years when the state's only giving you an increase every 5. That's just not easy. You know, I don't like to look at myself in the mirror when I have to tell people that. So I'm not comfortable unless part of what we can come to consensus on is that we're not going to let a teacher go any more than 2 years without a base state salary change. I could live with that. I can't live with, I'm not comfortable saying, go on 20-year veteran, support this person who might be 20 years older than you are, but they're going to come in and have, you know, be in a classroom doing the same work that you're doing, and you're not going to get anything more, and your salary is not going to be substantially different. That just doesn't sit well with me. So I would like to see if there's a subcommittee working on this, and that again, it not be no different than about a 2-step difference or 2 years difference. And I still feel like there are so many unanswered questions that we've got to get to, and that's one reason I've said less than I've wanted to say, because there's still a lot of unanswered questions, and I'm hoping we're going to get to some of those today too. So.
Thank you, Marcy. And please don't apologize for talking a lot. We need to hear your voice and the voices of others so we can figure out what some of those questions are to address. So please don't feel apologetic for that purpose.
I agree.
Any other comments, feedback? All right, so it seems like we need to work on the work session that we've talked about, try to get that scheduled. We need to try to figure out who will participate in that conversation. Dr. Evans, I hope you don't mind me offering you up as the point person. So if individuals have interest in serving or participating in that work session, they can communicate that intent directly to you. Is that okay, Dr. Evans?
Yes, that is completely fine.
Perfect. And then Brenda, I'm certain we will, I won't say bother you, we'll contact you to help think about that notion of, you know, what's the target that we should be thinking about to take over the region, if you will, so that we can try to start working within that particular parameter. And then we'll try to identify some of those other parameters that we've alluded to throughout the conversation. What am I missing, colleagues? Anything that I'm overlooking or anything that we need to put on the radar for immediate consideration? Dr. Flynn, anything? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, when you were asking if there's anything else, I hope, I shouldn't say hope, but the task at hand is just something I think we need to focus on right now, of getting this, what I'll say, salary schedule finalized. I hope there's, I know there's a lot other things that this committee was tasked with, but I do think if we can get this one big piece finished, it will help answer some of these others.
Agreed.
So, Dr. Graham, do we want to give a deadline for folks to decide whether they want to be part of this work group or not?
Yes, let's do that ASAP because we will need to. I'm thinking of the timeline that we have, which is pretty tight. So, colleagues, I would ask if you have interest in serving or participating in this work group no later than the end of this week, no later than close of business Friday. We need to hear from you. So if you can communicate that to Dr. Evans, give yourself a couple of days to check your schedule and check your availability in the weeks ahead. If you'll communicate that to Dr. Evans, and we'll try to circle back to you and go from there. Dr. Fleming, DPI staff, is there anything that we are overlooking as part of our agenda for the day that we need to address?
So one recommendation that I believe it came from Advancement and Development was to increase the professional advancement accounts. They thought that the $2,500 was a minimal number, and they thought that it could be increased. I didn't know if you wanted to tack that on to the work session or if you wanted to discuss any of that now.
What's the will of the people? I want the work session to focus very narrowly, and this is Anthony Graham speaking, so others can jump in and chime in their thoughts, but I really want that work session to focus on the larger picture of the compensation schedule. And I don't want to, I think it was Bill who said this, I don't want to get distracted with other things. That's kind of what's been happening. We're trying to do that and all these other things, and we're missing the attentiveness that I believe we need to dedicate to the larger picture here. So that would be my preference. So if we can kind of talk about the development account, professional development account now a little bit, then I would prefer to do that now as opposed to tacking it on to the work session. Because I do think we have this until 3:30, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
I concur with Dr. Graham on that. I think that goes along with the other things we have to do. Very important, and I respect the other committee needing some information, but I think our biggest task at hand is getting the salary figured out. But I agree, if that's something we want to handle now, we can. But once when we have our work day on the salary schedule, I think that's really 100% of our work that day.
Mm-hmm. So colleagues, let's chew on the feedback that we've received that the $2,500 professional development account amount that we've identified is too small. And I know we had some conversation early on about this, and I can't remember where we began in terms of the PDA account amount, but it seems to be, I thought we were somewhere close to 5,000 or 4,500 or somewhere in that neighborhood. But would love to hear your thoughts. Unfortunately, I don't think we have any data to put in front of you to inform the conversation this afternoon. And if I'm wrong, someone can correct me. But I would like to at least cycle back to where we were in our initial conversations, where if I remember correctly, I'm trying to pull it up now as I'm talking, I believe we were around $4,500 as an initial conversation point, and then we worked our way down and landed on 2,500. But I would love to hear your thoughts and your reactions to this notion of 2,500 being too small for the professional development account.
So if I remember correctly, we looked at what some districts were estimating to pay for professional development, which is where we landed. And we looked at what it took potentially for coursework for people who were teachers in training. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I know that we pulled Wake's stuff, but there's also a lot of districts who supplement with tuition reimbursement and Praxis and Pearson testing reimbursement using Title II dollars or other dollars that they have. I struggle with looking at larger numbers. And part of that is because I believe you need to have skin in the game in order for it to be valuable. in order to really, and I will speak from experience when we were working with, when we built CCTI in Wake County and in the Central Carolina RESA group, several districts, Wake, we subsidized a great deal of the cost initially for those teachers. And we had a lot of teachers who didn't complete their programs or who backed out of their programs midstream, and it resulted in them not getting their licenses on time, and then we had to put them on subpay. And that's one small example. I don't know what other people experience necessarily in the state around those types of things. There are some districts, I think, that do subsidized coursework expenses, and it works very well for them. So I can live with $2,500. It would almost be interesting to have a flat dollar $2,500 and then consider there being other almost like grant opportunities for people to apply for grants or additional funding. I don't know if there's some larger need for it. But then there will be some who won't even take advantage of the $2,500. So how do you balance that? And there's a whole lot of questions in that. Not a lot of help.
Thanks, Dr. Holland. Other perspectives? And Dr. Evans, for clarity's sake, what entities suggested that the 2,500 was too low?
I believe it was advancement and development.
Colleagues, immediate reactions to the notion that 2,500 is too low?
They don't know how awesome of a pay compensation plan we're going to have.
I think leaving it at 2,500 for now might be advisable, and then evaluating the extent to which those funds are used and how they're used might inform whether or not we need to increase it or even lower it.
It's kind of the thinking I had as well, Dr. Holcomb, but I certainly wanted to hear from others before I impose my thoughts, but I agree with you completely.
And I do want to share my agreement in what Marcy had mentioned about everybody kind of having a little skin in the game. Again, that doesn't mean we don't do anything. But I think there's some sweat equity or working or whatever it may be, own money, going into some of this. It's good too on the teacher prep side, maybe not necessarily PD, but I just feel like, and I think because we do have the salary, the compensation stuff just looming over us, that some of this we just leave alone right now and try to tackle the main task at hand.
Mm-hmm. So is anyone opposed to, I'll attribute it to Dr. Holcomb because she said it so eloquently, anyone opposed to Dr. Holcomb's suggestion of let's leave it alone in the immediacy and we can revisit later? But at this moment in time, I think what's looming and what's most pressing is coming up with that salary schedule that we feel comfortable recommending to PEPSC. Anyone opposed to that approach? Okay. Hearing no comments, then I will assume that we will feel comfortable moving in that direction. So our takeaways for the day, number one, we'll work to identify who the individuals are who would like to participate in the working group conversation. If you will please raise your hand and let Dr. Evans know that by the close of business on Friday of this week, July 22nd, then we would appreciate it. we'll then work with that team of individuals to try to get a half-day, work day, whatever it may be, scheduled. Dr. Holland, I see your question in the chat as to whether or not it will be virtual or in person. I would prefer we push for in person. I don't know anything about reimbursements for travel or anything of that nature, but I just feel like being in person, that would allow us to have conversation with one another in that physical space, as opposed to this virtual space. I'm not opposed to virtual, but I feel there's something lost in this space. I think being able to see one another and write things on a whiteboard and hang up Post-it notes and all that good stuff, there's value in that space. And that's what I would prefer to see. Dr. Fleming, do you have any immediate reaction to that?
Well, I agree completely with you on that, Dr. Graham. I think there's something to be said about everybody being there.
Okay, so we'll push for in person. So as you're thinking about whether or not you would like to serve on this work group, then you'll need to ask yourself, are you comfortable with the possibility of coming into a location, wherever it may be, and working in a space? And we'll try to make certain that we're paying attention to some of those conventions to try to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 in that space as best we can. And we'll work out all the other logistics and things that go along with that. But that's the approach I would like for us to take. So that's item number one. Item number two then is to try to do the very best we can to come up with a target number that we're working to achieve with this framework, that's aspirational yet feasible, and will ensure that we are competitive within the region as best we can. So we'll try to work on those two pieces, as well as address any other parameters that we need to outline. So when we get to that work day, we can outline those parameters and begin to work within those guidelines, within those guardrails, and have true, honest conversation, leveraging the data we have available to us, so we can land on something that we could then bring back, I hope, to this body in that August meeting that we're trying to convene, that Dr. Evans will be working to schedule for us in the next few weeks. So those are the items I have as takeaways. Am I missing anything, Dr. Fleming, or anything we need to put on the radar?
No, all that sounds good.
DPI staff, anything that we need to address that we have not addressed, or anything that we need to clarify?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Colleagues, final opportunity. Any pressing or closing thoughts, remarks, comments based on the conversation today? Colleagues, Dr. Fleming and I, we thank you very much, as always, for your engagement, for your forthrightness, for sharing what you feel and believe that's important to the work of this subcommittee. And we value it, we respect it, and we honor it. So thank you so very much. I will conclude, or I will assume, that all work has been achieved for the purpose of this conversation. And if that's the case, then I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Is there a second?
This is Amy Holcomb, second. Thanks.
Thank you. It's been moved and properly seconded that we adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you so very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.